Welcome to An Honorable Profession, a podcast giving America hope since 2018. I'm Ryan Coonerty. Along with Debbie Cox Bolton of the New Deal, I'm lucky enough to be your co-host. An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. The New Deal is an organization that supports the next generation of American leaders. From attorneys generals to state senators to mayors to school board members, these are the people that are pushing policies and politics that will respond to climate change, rebuild our economy, address racial injustice, and restore our democracy. These are incredibly talented people who have dedicated themselves to public service when their country and their communities needed it the most. Check out newdealleaders.org to see what I'm talking about. Connecticut Representative Kate Farrar asked herself, if not me, then who? If not now, then when? Before jumping into a race for the state legislature in 2020. It was a familiar challenge, one that she had invoked over the years in elect her trainings to hundreds of women in college, encouraging them to run for student government. Once elected herself, Representative Farrar has continued to challenge herself, moving significant legislation to expand childcare, assist refugees, support local news, and improve bike and walkability in her community. She has a compelling vision for a healthy community and state. Enjoy. Connecticut Representative Kate Farrar, welcome to An Honorable Profession.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So I want to start with your path into public service and your advocacy for getting more women into public service. You were a key founder of Elect Her. Can you talk about that effort and how it intersects with your own personal journey?
Yeah, well, great question. And so glad to be here and happy to talk about how all of this started. Actually, I have to share this all started with a class assignment that I had when I was getting my undergraduate degree at the University of Connecticut. Go Huskies. And I had a class assignment actually that required me to interview a woman elected official. And I have to admit, as a political science major, even in my junior year, I had never even met an elected official. My parents were constant voters. I grew up talking about politics, but it just wasn't a part of my life that I engaged or met elected officials. And therefore, the first step I took with that assignment is I reached out to the state representative who represented the school, and her name was and is Denise Merrill. She went on to become our Secretary of the State. But out of that conversation and getting to chat with Denise, she offered me an internship at the state capitol. And it really changed everything, because when I showed up at the state capitol, somewhere I'd never visited growing up in the state, I saw firsthand not only everyone working on all these issues that I fundamentally cared about, but it was also the first time I felt like I saw so clearly how few women were in the room. And that really propelled what led to an over 20-year career in advocacy, primarily on gender equity issues. And as you noted, a piece of that was, how can I have a role to make sure that there are more women, particularly young women in the room? And one of my wonderful roles that I had at the American Association of University Women, we worked with another organization, Running Start, to develop this incredible first-time program, Elect Her, which is still running today. It is the only program in the country that trains collegiate women to run for student government and elected office. And, now hundreds of campuses, years later, it really, to me, is about making sure that women, especially young women, kind of see themselves as being, kind of contributors so early on in leadership. And we saw that if you start that out, especially in campus life, it can really translate to folks running at younger ages, even after college.
Amazing. And you just returned from the Democratic National Convention, and to have Vice President Kamala Harris selected as the nominee. Can you talk about what you think the impact that might have on both young women running for office and also professional women who want to decide they want to engage in their community or their state or their country?
Well, I think we've learned really since the loss, sadly, that we all felt of Hillary Clinton's loss, that generated so many women stepping up to run for political office. And I think in seeing this next incredible opportunity in our country to elect Kamala Harris as not just the first woman, but first woman of color, really is motivating so many folks, especially young women, to do something. As Michelle Obama says, do something they might have not considered before. And I hope that, in doing something, that propels them to pursuing what they can do in the next 70 days, but also what they can do after we elect our first woman president.
And can we talk a little bit about your journey from that conversation, which leads to an internship? And we all know how politics pulls folks in and then never lets go. Can you talk about your decision to move from training and advocacy into elected office yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, it was always about, how can I make a difference, right? And I think that's often what drives folks that are compelled to public service. And for many years, that was about the advocacy that I could do. And as you said, for many years, that was about training and encouraging so many other women to run. What finally came to terms for me was I really realized I had to take my own advice. I was encouraging so many other women for so many years, and I had to do it myself. And that really came to bear here, moving home to Connecticut. I was running a statewide nonprofit focused on women and girls. And it really was, coming to terms with what I had encouraged so many other women to do. And that's why I stepped forward and ran for state representative in 2020.
And can you talk? I mean, you've been in office for 4 years, both sort of what that experience has been like for you, but how bringing the lens of gender into the state legislative chamber has impacted policy in your state.
Yeah, well, first off, I can't help but acknowledge that 2020, I launched my campaign, and then a couple months later, we were in the heart of a pandemic. Certainly nothing that a first-time candidate anticipates. But for me in running, and then ended up winning, a primary and the general election through COVID. It really was a moment of people recognizing the value of government, right? We recognized how important it is for us to work together for folks' public health and safety. And therefore, for me, I kind of came in a moment of, folks really just, seeing value and believing in this role, especially at the state level of what our government was responsible for. And it meant so much work on a daily basis, as you can imagine, at that time, just with constituents and being a communicator, being a consistent and trusted communicator at that time, both as a candidate and when I was elected. Because all of this was unprecedented, right? It's sometimes hard to imagine where we were a few years ago, but that really was the case. And we were all, kind of trying to work together and make it up as we went. And that was really the case coming in as elected official during COVID, having special sessions, trying to work out, legislation with all the new federal funding coming in, really just trying to do everything that was possible, to get our state and our residents, out of this safely and back on our feet. So I'd like to think that this will be unprecedented. I'm not looking towards, going through another pandemic again. So that really shades my experience, I have to say, as someone who was running and knocking through COVID and connecting with constituents through COVID, and really tried to make sure that we were taking care of people, but building community and making sure that people felt connected and supported through all of that. And, as an elected official now, as you noted, kind of being a woman in the room that I saw so few women in, myself 20 years ago. I wish I could say that our numbers have substantially changed, but in Connecticut, we have approximately 37% women still in the legislature. And so we have a ways to go. But I would say that that's why it does matter. It matters for me to be there. It matters for our legislators of color to be there. All of us that in some ways and many ways to this day continually are often overlooked or marginalized in our policy decisions. I can say firsthand, it really changes the conversation and changes the policy.
And as you noted, I mean, the pandemic exposed big gaps in our safety net and challenges in all of our communities. One of the big challenges it exposed, both in the pandemic and then coming out of the pandemic, was a lack of childcare. You've been on the forefront of that effort in Connecticut by creating a trust fund for childcare. Can you talk about the goals of that program and the impacts that you hope it will have?
Yes, I mean, you're right on that. If we noted anything that we learned through the pandemic, it was all of these ways that we had often overlooked the infrastructure that is childcare in our communities, and we need to remind people every day of that as we continue this work. I think for me, it's not just around families having more affordable care and being able to make ends meet, but it's also that we know so strongly that these earliest years are pivotal for brain development, for the success of children. And we know that this investment is needed for our economy. We knew during COVID how many folks, primarily women, were out of the workforce, and we still are lagging in regards to getting women back in. So for me, it really is, treating childcare, like the infrastructure it is. And that meant this year I did lead a bipartisan coalition in the House with our priority bill. That was really to, start to address how we create more affordable and accessible childcare. We did establish this child care and education trust fund, which is meant to be a dedicated source of funding for our child care investment moving forward. We also established a new program called TriShare based on some work in Michigan and North Carolina, which is a partnership between business, families, and the state to jointly fund childcare. And then finally, we also had to acknowledge really just the wages that so many of our childcare workers are making. They are not paid what they're worth. And in this piece of legislation, we pursued getting them a wage supplement to make sure that we are supporting them as we continue to make these investments.
And so is the goal of these investments more childcare spots, as you said, increasing the workforce in and retention in the childcare space? What's the outcomes that you're working towards, and how do you see these policies impacting them?
Yeah. Well, I wish, like anything, there was one thing, as we know, as policymakers, if
Always.
only if it was that easy, we would have done it already. So it certainly is multifaceted. We were lucky here in our state, right in the past year, we've had work amongst the administration and legislature to create what is our Blue Ribbon Commission on Childcare, which really charted out a strategy for the next 5 years to build this investment. And as you said, that is about supporting the workforce to raising those wages. It is about making sure that we are kind of subsidizing, more families in our Care for Kids program. It is about making sure that we are creating especially more infant and toddler slots for children, because those are the ones most in need. And so all of that requires, this level of state and government investment. One of the things that came through in this past year is folks often don't realize how much we invest in K-12 education versus early childhood. And right now we're investing only kind of 1/20th of what we invest in K-12 education in our state. And again, when you think about those youngest years being so pivotal, not just for the children, but the families, this is why we wanted to create this dedicated fund, and that we can start putting specific revenues in there that can just go to some of these childcare needs that have been identified through this strategic plan work.
Yeah, the farther you can get upstream, the more impact you can have because you have school readiness and literacy, health, all those indicators. But it's always challenging to create, expand programs that are so preventative. We always want to spend money on the back end, but it's so incredibly important if you can help kids and their families in those first couple years of life. We'll be back to this conversation after this short break.
If you're like me, you're probably a bit frustrated with the state of our political system today. So why does American democracy look the way it does? And how can we make it more responsive to the people it was formed to serve? I'm Simone Leeper, host of Democracy Decoded, a podcast where we examine our government and discuss innovative ideas that could lead to a stronger, more transparent, accountable, and inclusive democracy. Democracy Decoded is a production of Campaign Legal Center. Find us at democracydecoded.org or wherever you get your podcasts.
In terms of, you mentioned childcare's infrastructure, but there's also infrastructure's infrastructure, and you've been really focused on alternative modes of transportation, walkability, clean energy, especially for the community you represent in West Hartford. Can you talk a little bit about those efforts and sort of how they integrate into a healthy community?
Yeah, I think more than anything, as you said, what I hear from my constituents in West Hartford and Newington and really across the state is, folks recognize we need to create a state that is more affordable so everyone can thrive. And we need to create a state where everyone feels like they're living in a healthy community. And that a key piece of that, right, as you said, is how do I get around? How do I live, work, and play? And, how do I, go through my day so that I'm not just dependent on my car, right, or on using that vehicle as transportation. And here in our communities in West Hartford and Newington, we have benefited from infrastructure that was developed, which is a kind of dedicated busway. And we've been trying to maximize really the housing and business development that is around that for transit-oriented development. And for me, what's so pivotal is, folks recognize that once we, are creating these opportunities for people to have more walkable sidewalks, to be able to bike, to work or bike to the grocery store, that there's really an opportunity for folks to feel like they're more connected as a community as well. And as you said, there also have an opportunity to be doing something that's good for the climate. And so for me, I'm really focused on how do we just bring more of that mindset to how we're developing and designing our roads, how we're developing and designing our housing, and what policies we're putting together in our state so that communities feel encouraged to pursue these more walkable and livable communities.
Yeah, and we should talk specifically about e-bikes. I always thought of e-bikes as a nice thing, but I was recently talking to someone who's been to my community dozens of times. This time he came with friends and they only used e-bikes, and he saw whole different parts of the community, had a whole different experience, spent a lot less time in traffic, and it really was transformational in how what his experience in the community was. Can you talk about some of your efforts around e-bikes to create that sense of connection and green infrastructure?
Yeah, because I think when we talk about folks, kind of pursuing greener transportation, sometimes people feel stuck on, not being able to pursue getting a hybrid or EV vehicle. And that's why e-bikes are such an awesome option for folks. And it's why, we pursue legislation to provide rebates for e-bike purchases. And there was a focus in those on our economic justice communities, of which I have several. And those really allowed folks who may not have even thought about pursuing an e-bike for purchase before to have access to pursuing, that purchase. And we expect to have that program open up again. It was so popular, they went very quickly. But as you said, once folks use an e-bike for the first time, they realize that it makes transport way easier for them. And here in our communities, as we've expanded our trails to connect from town to town, it really ensures that folks, can get to place and have that, new form of transport that they might not have thought about before.
I want to talk about two other initiatives that you've been really involved with that are also about community, but are actually really on the cutting edge and taking difficult issues and making some progress. And the first one is helping with refugee resettlement and integration into a community. And the second one is support of local journalism. I feel like in both those areas, we're inundated with bad news, and reading about you, I was like, okay, there's there's hope in both these areas that are really essential for a better world and for more, a more vital community.
Yeah, well, I can first speak to the work with the refugee and immigrant community. I have to say this is very personal for me. My husband was a refugee. He came to this country when he was 5 with his family. And I really have learned firsthand from him and all of his family members what that meant and how their lives were transformed, right, to create a safer and better life. And really, when I look at Connecticut, I am so proud because we are a state that welcomes all. And my work primarily with the refugee and immigrant community has been one that has been trying to make sure, again, kind of in this focus of how do we make sure that folks can thrive here in Connecticut, we were able to establish more significant funding for our refugee resettlement organizations. Often what happens when refugees come to our state or any state, there's a few months of federal funding supplied to help them get housing, to help them hopefully seek employment. And what we find in Connecticut, because of our cost of living, often the particular funding for housing was running out too soon for those families. And that's why myself and a colleague, Representative Leeper, we were able to secure $1 million the last couple of years to dedicate towards this need, to really make sure that all of our refugees and immigrants that are coming to our state really can have that basis and that foundation in order for them to thrive. And for me, in representing the district that I do too, I have, significantly diverse community. And one of those communities is actually the Nepalese community. I have the largest Nepalese community in the entire state. And we work closely together on expanding access to driver's licenses, another aspect of someone needing to restart their lives. And that was something we worked with our Department of Motor Vehicles on to expand the number of languages, for our license exams. And it's just one other piece of the picture of how families need to, restart their lives and restart contributing to our economy.
And refugees and immigration is such a polarizing hot button issue. How did you build support among your colleagues for that additional funding and efforts in your state?
I think to me, it continually comes back to, all the ways that, these families are contributing, to our communities. And it really has often been like these things are, a lot of one-on-one conversations, with colleagues about, folks that, they might know in their communities that have recently resettled, what they're seeing in regards to, them pursuing employment or starting new businesses, and really establishing with colleagues certainly the facts and figures and the overall values, that our refugees and immigrants bring. But often it's a lot of those one-on-one conversations because people can see firsthand often in their communities, how much refugees and immigrants are contributing to the workforce, to that community engagement that's needed. And that folks all respond to well, because they know that our Connecticut economy is very dependent on these incredible individuals that are coming to live in our state.
Well, good. Hopefully, it's a model that can go to other states and eventually to a more sane policy and humane policy at the federal level, where we can see this impact across the country. I mentioned local news. This is an area that is. It seems as though we read bad news every day about the loss of local news and the impact it has on both the quality and quantity of information about our democracy. You've taken efforts in Connecticut to try to address that. Can you talk about how that has gone and what you hope the impact will be?
Yes, and thanks for noting this key role of journalism to build community, but also to hold us accountable as elected officials. That's
Absolutely.
how I view it too. I have to admit, so this idea to pursue this type of policy first came to me at my first New Deal gathering, and so I really credit New Deal for this pursuit of this effort for saving journalism, and I thank you for that. So thanks, New Deal, for generating this
That's
idea.
the whole point, is to steal these ideas.
Yeah. So, really, I was, grateful to learn about what we could potentially do, and thankful for some other states that have really taken this up with us in Connecticut. What I pursued here last year and then this year is a piece of legislation that doesn't require more funding, but requires a certain percentage of our state-funded advertising dollars to go to locally owned press. And this I kind of put forward, in the hopes of, we don't need to spend money, we just need to pay attention to where we are spending our money. And it really has launched a whole dialogue about the value of our local press. It's launched a whole dialogue about folks really seeing and recognizing how few locally owned press outlets we still have in the state, and it really has generated a new coalition of news outlets, democracy focused organizations who have really bonded together over this. We wonderfully in the first year, got it out of committee and got it out of the House. We did the same this year, out of committee and out of the House. And we just need to get that Senate to bring it up. So we will be working in the off session leading up to January on around pursuing this approach. But again, I know several other states have gone even broader in their approach of supporting journalism. They've looked at tax credits, I know, looked at grants. And so the coalition will be considering, how we want to approach this moving forward. But I think in the last 2 years, we have generated the attention of this that it so deserves. And folks have, seen not just the value to, what we're reading on an everyday basis or what we're learning about, but also it really generates a lot of interest about our young people's civic education. I have several colleagues who teach social studies and civics, and to them, this is an essential, right? We need local journalism in order for our youngest folks to be engaged in government and kind of understand what it means to be an engaged citizen as well.
I couldn't agree more. And I love that it was birthed at the New Deal conference, and that it's continuing to generate not only a specific piece of legislation, but a broader conversation. I also, as listeners have often talked about, or often heard me talk about, I firmly believe that we don't think enough about government as a purchaser, and leveraging those dollars for good. There's lots of rules and regulations and ways that we can investments that we can focus on through legislation. But if we can guide the billions of dollars that government spend in ways that align with our values and our policy goals, we can often have a great impact. And your bill is a perfect example of thinking that way and having it do real good.
Hear, hear. I hope I can have good news after next session.
Good. We will all urge the Senate in Connecticut to do the right thing,
to take it up
and move that bill forward. In our final moments here, I think I'd just like to hear your advice for people who are thinking about engaging in government, whether running for office or supporting somebody run for office, specifically women, about what this moment means and how best to engage in order to make the change that we all want to see.
No pressure in that.
Yeah.
No, I think, what I often think about in a lot of the trainings I facilitated over the years, I often come back to the refrain that is credited to Alice Walker, it's credited to John Lewis, which is the refrain of, if not you, then who? And if not now, then when? And if you just ask yourself that fundamental question, to me, it often sparks folks saying, yeah, if not me, then who? I want someone like me to be seen and heard. And if not now, there's always going to be a reason not to do it. And I think fundamentally, just like I shared, and finally taking my own advice, it's stepping forward and taking that risk and know that the support is there to make it happen. And that's kind of the fundamental here too. I would say to anyone considering this, it can often feel that you're alone, but I can tell you you are not alone. There are so many, not just friends and family that want to support you, but so many organizations and support networks that are ready to step up and support you as you seek to lead in a new way. And, starting out and taking that first step shows that you are the leader who recognizes that it has to be you and it has to be now.
Love that. And we love that you joined us today, and we love having you in New Deal. And we can't wait to see many of these policies both enacted in your state, but then also hopefully heard about, talked about at a New Deal conference and enacted in other states, and we start to really see that impact. Thank you for joining us today. It's been wonderful talking to you.
Thanks so much.
An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. Thanks to the team at New Deal for producing this episode. We encourage you to bring honor to public service, and because we keep things honorable, no tax dollars are used in the making of this podcast.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.